it is time to move on to some database talk. So, the database part of testing, fixtures or dynamic data? Now, in the context of Ruby on Rails, which is where we both do most of our development now, this is kind of a big deal, and there are a lot of implications to both methods. So, what is your preference?
Basically dynamic data, and some of that is due to history. So for example, when I started doing more testing in earnest, fixtures were kind of given a bad stigma, and they were saying, oh, it would make your tests brittle, which I still think they do to a certain extent. So basically I've just been doing dynamic data. But today, when I look at fixtures, I still think they make things more brittle. And I actually think it's a little bit of for programmers to rely on fixture seems like a little bit of an anti-pattern type thing, because wouldn't you want to code to dynamically create your data for your tests? I don't know.
One would think. Now, the flip side of that,
the advantage, in my opinion, with fixtures is that it may give you a little bit more performance.
Right, and that's what I was going to say. Fixtures typically, in most cases, are going to be more performant than having to put records in and then take them out, and then put records in and then take them out. So yes, however, every time I've tried to use them, and it's been a long time since I've tried to use them because I had such bad experiences, but that's where I started, was fixtures. And every time I tried to use them, I spent more time trying to update and fix my fixtures than I did writing my actual tests. And it got to the point where with things like FactoryBot and other generation tools, and of course database cleaner that would let you put things in transactions and those types of things, that the performance difference wasn't enough to justify the problems and the maintenance hassles of fixtures. Yeah. So,
and I think, just to communicate to people who haven't used Ruby on Rails, fixtures are basically you put static data in the database, or you read in static data so it's in the database, and then you kind of rely upon that data being there for you to run your test, as opposed to dynamically creating the data each time.
Right.
Is that a good sense? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're called fixtures in Rails, but I'm sure it's basically putting in more static data in the database. I'm sure there's other frameworks that do it differently.
Right.
Or they do the same thing, but call it something different.
And there are certain situations where I think fixtures are actually a good thing. For instance, in some cases, testing APIs with fixtures is, I think, a reasonable thing to do. Because once you create an API, you're not going to change it that often. And so getting the fixtures are still, in most cases, better performing than data. And if I just have fixtures there and I've got my API tests, I can ramp through them real fast. And in most cases, the API tests don't need a lot of changing data. So I'm not saying that's always good for APIs, but that's a place where I can think where I've actually used fixtures for testing because there was no real reason in that scenario to use dynamic data.
I mean, I never used fixtures because I'm just kind of like once I'm on something, I just kind of use the same hammer on all the nails.
Right. And for me, it's very rare that I come across a situation where I'll even consider fixtures. APIs are the only ones that I could think of that I've even looked at it for a long time.
And the thing about it is like, if you have, I think what will get you, so it sounds like the main reason we've said fixtures is a way to go is due to speed. But probably what's more important for speed is to not put a lot of your custom code in your models or your controllers, and keep them in separate objects. That because then if you have separate objects, you don't have to necessarily, that depends on how you structure them and what they do, you don't necessarily have to persist data to the database.
Right.
So then you're going to have you can have blazingly fast tests for testing all of your independent Ruby objects,
Right.
or classes, or whatever you want to call them.
Yep, for sure.
Because if you have a bunch of code in your controllers and in your models, then it kind of is inextricably tied to be able to commit things to the database and read back things from the database and things of that nature. And that's just going to slow, your tests down.
Right. So yeah, I think we're both pretty much agreed that fixtures are just, in almost all cases, bad news. just don't use them.
But it's in the cost benefit analysis. In our experience, the benefits don't outweigh the costs.
Yeah, to put it another way, they suck.
If you like this clip and want to watch another one, you can click right here. Or if you want to watch the full video, you can click here.